sure. An engine whirred, coughed, and caught. Was it a boat or a car? She thought she saw a plume of exhaust in the darkness on the other side of the dock. Tires skidded on sand, bit into a hard surface, and squealed as a vehicle turned. A sound came off the water. Was it an echo? Had the vehicle turned left or right? She couldn't tell. Stillness settled again. It was as if no scream had ever spoiled the peace of the evening. No splash. No one moved on the boats. No curious heads poked out of cuddies. No one stood up in cockpits. None of the strollers along the bulkhead paused to point and shout. Was she the only one who had heard the scream and splash, the sound of a motor, the squeal of tires? Victoria looked at her watch. Not quite 7:30. What the devil could she do? She hadn't the foggiest notion of how to use the radio in the shack to call the harbormaster and Elizabeth, tell them about the commotion, the scream, and the splash. She picked up the envelope on which she had written the first line of her poem and put it back in her pocketbook. She paced the deck in front of the shack, no more than 8 feet. She paced down the side of the shack, no more than 12 feet. She turned and paced back again. Night was settling on the harbour. The bright sunset colours had faded, and now dark purple wind clouds scudded across the darkening sky. Finally, she heard, dimly, an outboard motor heading into the channel. The entry lights had come on, triggered by darkness, a flashing red on the right of the harbour entrance, green on the left. Victoria eased herself down the ramp that led to the floating dock where Elizabeth would tie up the harbourmaster's launch. She held the railing tightly with both hands. She was not going to act like an old lady, slipping and falling and breaking something. She had to tell the harbourmaster what she had heard, what she might or might not have seen, and she had to tell him immediately. The launch turned into the channel and slowed. Its bow settled down, levelled, and its wake dropped behind it in a long, curling V that broke in small combers against the rock sides of the channel. Elizabeth, lanky as a boy in the fading light, was in the stern, holding the tiller. Domingo sat in the bow seat, facing her, his arms folded over his broad chest, his dark baseball cap squared over his brow. Victoria knew that cap, the navy blue one that read NYPD in faded gold letters. "Hey, Gram!" Elizabeth idled the engine and let the boat drift into the floating dock. "What's up?" Victoria could see her granddaughter's bright eyes in the dusk, her short gold-streaked hair tousled in damp curls. Domingo turned, careful not to upset the boat's balance, and doffed his cap. "Sweetheart," he said to Victoria, "be careful. Watch yourself." He remained seated. "Grab the line, Grammy." Elizabeth reached for a cleat with slender fingers, held the boat against the floating dock, and passed the stern line to Victoria. Domingo still remained seated. Victoria, who'd been reared around boats, flung the line around a cleat and secured it. Elizabeth got out carefully and stood up straight. A tall young woman, 30 was young to Victoria, in tan shorts and white uniform shirt. The bow of the boat dipped lower in the water with the weight of the harbourmaster. Domingo uncrossed his arms long enough to hand her the bowline. "Don't put the boat away yet." Victoria stood up and backed toward the railing on the ramp so that she could hold on to something. "What's up, sweetheart?" Domingo pulled his cap down over his close-cropped hair and adjusted it over his heavy black brows. The boat bumped gently against the fender of the floating dock. "I heard something on the other side of the harbour." Victoria pointed toward the east chop dock with her gnarled hand. "A scream, then a splash." She held the railing and braced herself against the slight movement of the dock. "I thought I saw someone before I heard the scream, but I'm not sure." "Get in," Domingo ordered. Elizabeth held out her hand for her grandmother, and Victoria took it and settled herself onto the middle seat, her back to Elizabeth, who sat down again in the stern seat and started the motor. Domingo undid the lines and gave the dock a small shove with his hand. He leaned toward Victoria. "Show us where, sweetheart." Elizabeth steered away from the floating dock, as much at home on the water as Victoria had been at her age. She piloted the launch among the sailboats moored in the centre of the harbour slowly, so the wake wouldn't upset dishes or cocktail-hour glasses. Victoria heard music coming from the cockpits and cabins, music that varied from boat to boat. Rock, reggae, Bach, mostly contained within the boats. She could see the soft light of kerosene lamps, the glow of battery-operated lanterns. "The scream was loud enough to wake the dead," Victoria said to Domingo. Elizabeth shifted slightly in the stern seat. Domingo unfolded his arms long enough to gesture toward the music wafting from the boats. The whites of his eyes contrasted with his dark face, made it look still darker. He shrugged, hands out, pale palms up, opened his eyes wide. His expression seemed to say, "What do you expect?" Victoria hadn't realized how loud the music must be inside the boats. Domingo peered out from under the peak of his cap, dark eyes watching her. Victoria, who had gotten to know him well during the 2 months Elizabeth had worked for him, saw an expression of pleasure she had never seen before. Retired New York cop back in action, she thought. Behind her, Elizabeth was quiet as she steered the launch slowly among the boats. "Where did the sound come from?" Domingo asked. Victoria pointed toward the far shore. He lifted his chin at Elizabeth. "You," he said, "slow down. You're making too much wake." Elizabeth grunted and slowed the boat. The wake trailed off gently, met and broke against the whitecaps that wind and tide had stirred up in the harbour. The bow of the launch slapped small breaking waves, sending sprays of water over the harbourmaster's uniformed back, an occasional spray over Victoria. Her face glistened with salt water, her beak-like nose dripped water, and diamonds of moisture sparkled in her white hair in the light from shore. Above them, the sky had become black velvet, punctuated with stars so bright the lights from shore couldn't drown them out. "The tide's changed," Domingo said. "The current will be full flood in another 10 or 15 minutes. The launch's red and green running lights reflected off the darkening surface of the harbour. The stern light trailed a path of white glitter behind them. Victoria lifted her right hand from the gunwale, gingerly so as not to upset the balance, and pointed toward the dock, now dark. "More that way." Elizabeth changed direction slightly, and the bow slapped the choppy water. "Slow down," Domingo ordered Elizabeth. "There's no rush." Elizabeth cut the speed to bare headway. "Sweetheart, let me have the searchlight under your seat." Victoria felt around until she found the plastic-encased light and handed it to him. "You," he gestured to Elizabeth, "back and forth, starting here." Elizabeth gave the boat more power. "What's your hurry? Slow down." He turned back to Victoria. "Sit still, sweetheart. Tell me if you see anything." He swept the searchlight across the dark surface of the water. The light reflected on foamy white wave tops. Elizabeth turned the boat and steered slowly toward the light on the harbour house. When she was even with the last of the moored boats, she turned again and steered toward the barely discernible osprey pole, a line against the pinkish-grey evening sky. They were broadside to the waves now, and the launch rolled, shipping water with an occasional slurp until an inch or so sloshed around in the bottom of the boat. "The bailer is under the seat, Gram." Victoria fumbled until she found the Clorox bottle scoop tied to a thwart with a length of fishing line. She spread her knees apart and leaned over to scoop up the water at her feet. She heaved it over the side, careful to toss it away from the wind. "Your grandmother's a better sailor than you are." Domingo nodded at Victoria. Elizabeth snorted, a sound Victoria interpreted as a muffled laugh. Domingo swept the light back and forth as they moved closer to shore. Victoria bailed. The Clorox scoop scraped.